who did Batgirl? It wasn't James Gunn.
No, it wasn't James Gunn, but the people that directed the last Bad Boys film, and it's, from my understanding, the only Bad Boys film that had good reviews across the board.
You already are making me not want to see this Batgirl film. And I look, I have Batgirl right here next to me, okay? Within arm's reach.
Beyond any terror ever known, the Black Sleep, it wakes the dead. 5 of the screen's greatest horror thrill stars: Basil Rathbone, Akim Tamirov, Lon Chaney, John Carradine, Bela Lugosi, and these beautiful women in their power. Pass through a madman's hellfire. Enter an ancient abbey's secret passage into the most terrifying torture dungeon from the medieval past. Shocking victims of a famous brain specialist gone berserk. Plunging you into a reign of terror.
That's cerebral fluid. But that means this man is alive.
Yes, alive.
This is criminal. Monstrous.
Mungo!
Why not use her? Put her under Black Sleep. Take her up to surgery at once.
A horror beyond belief, feeding on beauty, lusting to claw the world apart.
Welcome back to Geek Channel 8. I'm Eric. Today on the podcast, I have an old friend of mine, John Zanardelli, who I met when we were both working in independent film. He's an old friend, but also a big movie fan. So without further ado, welcome, John.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be aboard.
What I always ask when people come on the show is, what have you been streaming lately? Or what have you been watching in the theaters or reading or playing in the case of video games? Because we've got a lot of people who that's their media of choice. What media have you been consuming lately?
I actually just got back from watching Evil Dead Rise in the theater. I'm kind of proud of myself. I got to see something opening weekend.
Okay, so I got to ask, because I've worked on 2 of Sam Raimi's films, and I'm a huge Sam Raimi fan. And I saw Evil Dead, the original, in second run, but on the big screen. Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, in second run, but on the big screen. And Army of Darkness in first run on the big screen. In fact, I've watched them all back to back to back on the big screen at a festival once. So I'm a Raimi fan. The reboot, I was disappointed in, because here's my take on the Evil Dead franchise. The first film, they were still getting the formula down. I thought it was a little too typical horror movie. The second one, Dead by Dawn, I thought the addition of a little more slapstick humor, the hybrid of horror / comedy, was very unique to Evil Dead, and I thought that was great. Army of Darkness, I felt they went a little too far in that direction. It was more slapstick fantasy than horror, and the horror elements were given short shrift. So the perfect sweet spot for me is Evil Dead 2, also known as Dead by Dawn. When I saw the new movie, first of all, without Ash, it's already an uphill climb.
Except at the end.
Well,
at the very end of the credits.
There's a very, very brief insert. I think it was post credits.
Post credit.
But the overall tone was just wrong. It, to me, was like a haunting Exorcist type thing, and it was not Evil Dead. And part of that, it's also lacked Raimi's signature like shaky cam stuff and all that crazy camera work, and also a charismatic person. Like, I don't care about some random teenagers that go to a cabin. I never do. It's always about the monsters, right? And so I don't know. What was your take without spoilers? Because we don't want spoilers on the show.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. Well, I will say this: if you didn't like the tone of the reboot, you may not be too much of a fan of this one. I think it was honestly just me and maybe one other person in the theater when I saw it. I saw it was like the second or third week it was released, and some friends were raving about it. I was like, all right, fine, I'll check it out. I checked it out. I thought that, like, I mean, it's also trying to find its genre style, its footing. Like it's trying to be in the spirit of essentially the whole trilogy, like. And getting into the reboot, the 2013 one, when it gets to the end and the person we thought was going to be the next Ash or whatever turns out not to be, and then everything in there just starts going so far over the top where it just starts, the second it starts raining blood, I started laughing hysterically because I was like, okay, here's the over the top. They saved the first half is the first Evil Dead. The second half is the second Evil Dead. And that's where the tones kind of blended for me. So I thought it was a nice compliment. And that's kind of what I got out of this one too. There are some moments, as far as like the shaky cam, like they do find a way to actually make a good joke with the handheld tracking shot. Like they do that. Like you see it go from land to water. And this is the opening minute of the film. So it's like, it's not a big spoiler, but they find a way to actually, they tie it in and it's well done. From there, it gets into that tone of, yeah, it's dark, it's grittier, it's relentless. But instead of being a bunch of teenagers, what worked really well for me was the fact that it was a family. It's a single mother, 3 kids, like it's a building that's about to be condemned in about a month or whatever. And the production design is gorgeous. Like I thought the production design of the Hellraiser reboot last year was actually incredible. And like this kind of brought like that, I want to say like Del Toro Art Deco style into it. And I really dig like that angular look, and like the rooms, the walls and everything was so well done. I had fun. There's 1 or 2 funny moments, but it doesn't like just get too campy with it. There's campy moments, but it definitely feels very relentless in the horror.
I'm going to wait for streaming on this one. But what I liked about Evil Dead 2 is not just the over the top slapstick, with Ash getting like beat up all the time, but it's also like little touches, like the evil gets into his hand and he like chainsaws it off, right? And like then this starts a whole fight between him and the hand, and the hand flips him off, things like that are funny. But then he eventually traps it under a coffee can and throws some big books on it, and like the top book is like A Farewell to Arms. It's like little things like that are like the rainy touches that I love.
There's 1 or 2 little brief things in there, and I think like people like you and me would be the only ones that would catch it. The first time we see this kid in his recording booth, let's just say there's a Three Stooges poster in the background that kids his age of this generation wouldn't have. And people like you and me would be the only one that would get the reference of the name that's blocked out.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we're getting dangerously close to spoilers territory. So let's move on to our topic for today, which is horror. Maybe, I don't know. We'll have to discuss whether it qualifies as a horror film or not. The Black Sleep, which was also released under the title Dr. Cadman's Secret from 1956. Now, the reason I chose this film is we have a subtle tradition on this show, which we've left unspoken. I don't know if anyone's picked up on it yet. Every so often, we throw in a film set in the past. And that past is often the year 150 years earlier than what we're talking the podcast. This one's actually 151 years now, but it's roughly 150 years ago is when this was set. We're recording this in 2023, and it was set in the year 1872. So I want to give a little background to the year 1872, little memory jog to what life was like at that time if you happened to be alive 150 years ago. February 27th of 1872, Charlotte Ray becomes the first Black female lawyer to graduate from Harvard University. Keep in mind, this is still very close after the Civil War. This is during Reconstruction. March 11th, work begins at Seven Sisters Colliery in South Wales, which is one of the richest coal mines in Britain. April 21st, the Third Carlist War begins in Spain. In May of 1872, the Rangers FC of Glasgow plays their first game on Glasgow Green. It's a scoreless draw against Callander. In May 10th, Victoria Woodhull, the first woman nominated for president of the United States, is disqualified for being a year too young. June 15th, Thomas Hardy anonymously publishes the novel Under the Greenwood Tree in England. July 15th, Hochi Mail News, later Hochi Daily News, a Japanese language daily newspaper, is first published in Tokyo. August 22nd, the Australian Overland Telegraph Line is completed, which is the first link between Australia and the rest of the world, communications link. September 1st, a group of Maya under Marcos Canol attacked the British garrison at Orange Walk Town in British Honduras. September 17th, Shiseido, I don't know how to pronounce this, Shiseido, you see it at the mall all the time. The pharmacy shop, which is now a global cosmetics brand, was founded in Ginza, Tokyo, Japan. October 1st, the first case is reported in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, of the Great Epizootic of 1872, which is equine influenza or horse flu. And it will substantially disrupt life in North America by mid-December, causing a pandemic.
We don't have any familiarity with that now, do we?
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, if you had mentioned a pandemic, people would have no frame of reference for what that meant,
Right, yeah.
November 16th, the first ever Metropolitan Police strike occurs in London. And December 21st, the Challenger expedition sails from Portsmouth on a 4-year scientific expedition that lays the foundation for the science of oceanography. Also in science news in 1872, Charles Darwin published his third major book on evolutionary theory. It was called The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. And it was originally supposed to be a chapter in his previous book, The Descent of Man, but as he started writing it just grew in length and eventually was published separately. The book is considered a major advancement in brain science since it dealt with the biological aspects of emotional life. So that's where brain science was at the time.
Good. It's good you brought that up because I was actually trying to find that out as I was watching this movie.
Okay. This opens with a doctor, Dr. Ramsey, and he is in prison set to be hanged for the murder of a man named Curry. He claims he's innocent, and he's visited by a Dr. Cadman who says he's going to take care of it. Cadman puts a drug in his drink, a drug that we saw in the opening title cards was called Nind and Hydra. The actor that plays this doctor who's supposed to be hanged is Herbert Rudley, but the actor that plays Dr. Cadman is Basil Rathbone, who everybody should know from Sherlock Holmes fame. The greatest Sherlock Holmes, in my opinion, of all the actors that have played Sherlock Holmes, he's the number one, with maybe tied with Jeremy Brett. Those two, one of the two. So he drugs his drink and it puts him into this fake death, the black sleep. Then a grave robber is hired to dig him up and bring the coffin back to Cadman's lab, secret lair, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Mansion, whatever it is. And that sort of kicks us off.
When we first see this guy who's convicted of murder, he seems very convinced that he's just absolutely innocent. And there wasn't a part of me that felt, oh, there might be something this guy's hiding, or because like sometimes when you watch a film, you get a sense that there's like something either in a tone or in his story that something seems off. This one seems like when he's telling the story, it's like, there's no way I could have done anything to this guy. I don't even know this guy. Oh, and that's the thing I looked up is they say the man weighed 20 stone. I had to look up
how much is that?
So apparently 1 stone equals 14 pounds and 20 stone would make the guy 280 pounds.
280 pounds.
So yes. So this guy who's saying, oh, there's no way I could have lifted him. Yeah, there's no way you could lift a near 300-pound man, like especially with the stature this guy had in jail. So yeah, I completely, and I like that little bit of innocence about him. And I was like, oh, cool, this guy's gonna get him out of this circumstance. But there's something that does seem a little off about it. It's a good setup. It's a good setup to the story. I mean, even if it seems familiar, it seemed very, for being a B flick, it was very well executed.
Yep. 280 pounds is up there.
Pretty, yeah.
It's not inconceivable, though. Like, it's not a ridiculous amount.
It's not, but this guy was clearly not a like Jack LaLanne of the time.
So Tor Johnson, who we'll talk about here soon, he weighed 440 pounds.
Oh, so Tor went on a diet for this film.
Okay. While he's there, strange things start to happen. Specifically, some residents of this castle are awful strange. And one of them is Mungo. Mungo, played by Lon Chaney Jr., is some sort of slightly hunchback character that seems to be mentally not quite with it.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Like a deranged Quasimodo, not like the sympathetic Quasimodo. So it's almost like it seemed like a parody of a previous family role almost.
Right.
It was either him or his dad that played the original Hunchback, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was Lon Chaney Jr. Normally, automatically my mind goes to the Wolfman when I think of him, right?
Yeah, that's where my mind goes too.
But yeah, he was also Quasimodo. I think he's channeling a little bit of that character for this. Mm-hmm. Another one of the horror greats is in this, Bela Lugosi, who plays Casimir. Yeah. There are a number of sort of freakish characters that occupy this castle. Now we learn that the Dr. Cadman's wife is comatose and has a brain tumor. And so he is doing experiments in brain surgery to try to map the brain so that he can eventually save her life.
Basil Rathbone's character, you start seeing the experiments and everything that he does. Like, he goes through the procedure. This man that basically they faked his death and everything. Like, he's there to like kind of take notes and just kind of track everything that he's done with the experiments. And at first he's intrigued and he thinks it's a big advancement in science, but then he begins raising questions when he figures out, oh, this person's not dead. This person that you're experimenting on is alive. And he starts to begin to question the morality of this entire thing. It gets fairly graphic for a 50s film, like seeing an open brain surgery during this procedure. And you start to realize that it's had effects on everybody that this procedure's been done on. What I liked about it was once we started seeing how deep the effects went and how many people he's done this to, it's what the nature of good science fiction is what if? Like, what if there was a cure for this, but to do so would lead to some true, like the people that had a life would be essentially ruined from the mind out. Like, we find out Mungo, I think, was like this assistant's father, wasn't it? Yeah. And then I don't know if like subconsciously he recognizes her, but there's moments you find out that if she looks at him a certain way, that's what sets him off. That was like the monster you were alluding to in the beginning there. Like that's the first interaction he has with anybody in the estate outside of Basil and the person who made his corpse up and everything. It's this woman screaming and running out of a hallway being chased by Lon Chaney. And then you come to find out that's her dad. And what I liked about this is, again, as we were talking about horror early on, like we're used to like seeing something that is relentless from beginning to end. But with this one, is it a horror? Is it science fiction? It does like this good setup for the story, like a very dark Gothic story, the way that like Frankenstein was with, like I saw a lot of parallels with Frankenstein, especially when they mentioned galvanism. When they started talking about what galvanism was, that got a lot of attention through Frankenstein, actually, because it's about sending electricity through nerve endings to try to reanimate dead tissue.
Yep.
That's kind of what I liked about this is as they go down there, where you see all the other experiments and just seeing the degree of just what they did to these patients. Like it was pretty terrifying. I was not expecting that for a 1956 film.
So it reminded me of a couple of other films. It reminded me of Freaks, Todd Browning's Freaks, which is another one where it's like, is this truly horror? And if we consider Freaks to be a horror film, then I think we need to consider this to be a horror film.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, personally, I wasn't terrified of Freaks because it's people with deformities and abnormalities that were given a chance to be in a film. And I don't think there's anything to be afraid of with that. I mean, if anything, the scariest people there were the ones that were trying to murder other people, the fully normal people.
And by the way, Freaks starred Lon Chaney Sr. So Lon Chaney's father was in Freaks. The other film it reminded me of is a little more obscure film that came out only a few years before this in 1953. It was called The Maze. And I saw The Maze at a old theater called the Emery, which is now gone, long gone, but it was in 3D and it was projected in 3D. It was fantastic. The film's just okay, but it's another one that takes place in an old castle and the residents of the castle are kind of creepy, but it's not necessarily outright horror until like at the end, the sci-fi horror type elements come in right at the very end. But most of it is just atmosphere, which I think, if you're done right, you could consider that horror. So I'm going to consider The Maze horror. I'm going to consider Freaks horror, and I'm going to consider The Black Sleep to be a horror film.
Yeah, and honestly, going a little bit more modern, I'll even say something like Dark City.
Yeah,
if you want to think about it, because it's a more modern tone of the same story about darker experiments, but at the same time has a lot of atmospheric Gothic horror elements in there. So,
yep. As far as the science goes, that's totally believable to me. I could believe that if you were able to tell that someone had a brain tumor back then, I don't know how they were able to determine that, but if you were able to determine that, then the idea of, okay, I want to cut this out of her and save her life, but I don't want to do it without knowing where I'm cutting. So I have to do experiments on cutting other people. I can't do experiments on animals because that's not going to translate to humans. I need to cut up other people's brains to find out where is safe and how to do this. So I could totally believe that if you were amoral enough to do that. And certainly I'm sure there are people who are, that part of it, the motivations, totally believable. Let me give some shout outs to what I think were some of the best things about this movie, because I'm going to get into the bad things in a minute, but let's start with the good.
Okay.
One is that there are two actors that I think really steal the show in this. One is Basil Rathbone as Dr. Cadman. And the other is Odo the Gypsy. Akim Tamiroff played Odo the Gypsy. Those two really steal the show.
The two most effective scenes in the film for me, for Basil Rathbone, the scene after his assistant discovers all the horrors in the basement, and then before the guy's about to walk out, he says, "Let me show you one more thing." He takes him upstairs to see his wife. That entire scene, I thought was so incredibly effective. And Basil Rathbone, just like the way that he maneuvered between sympathetic and unhinged, and just there's so much complexity he gave to that role that you weren't sure whether you wanted to feel sorry for him or if you should feel terrified for him. It was just such a really good scene. I wanted to go into that one with you as well. Hopefully I'm not saying too much. And the other scene with Odo, with the lady in his parlor, had like, wow, the end of his scene with her, and that was really effective.
Another thing that I really liked about it is that it dealt with people that were sort of on the margins of society. So surgery, there was almost practically no such thing, so surgeons had to rely on people, grave robbers, to get bodies to practice on and stuff like that. This surgeon, Dr. Cadman, he lives in Limehouse, which is like that seedy area of London, the same place Jack the Ripper was known to strike. There's a lot of prostitution. Prostitutes, one way they could get money, that prostitutes could make money other than through prostitution, was posing for artists, because artists couldn't get a proper lady to, pose nude either. So there's that situation, or even pose at all. Artists in general, but in particular tattoo artists. Like, so Odo, one of his things,
Odo,
he's a tattoo artist. So that's another thing that's like, so, and clearly he's using these bodies to practice tattooing on, because we see the tattoos on the bodies. So there's a lot of things going on with that kind of thing. And the one other thing I want to say before I forget about it is that the score was great. It was Les Baxter. Fans of exotica and lounge music, like tiki culture, would be familiar with Les Baxter. He did the score for this, and it's really great. So those are the elements that I really liked about it. Okay, let's break down your favorite scenes.
The lady that thinks that she saw Curry at a bar or whatever, and she's about ready to like tell the inspectors and just ruin the whole plan, which you come to find out just how much Basil Rathbone's character manipulated everything, even from the beginning. Even the people tied to his experiments still found a way to be part of the experiments. When you discover exactly who Curry was and how they all tied together, and you're like, he put all of this together, like that was such a good moment. But then to see that this woman who was about to blow the whistle on everything, Odo puts her in the sleep, just so that like when the police come by, it's like, oh, sure, look around, you won't see anything. He's got her hidden in like a secret compartment behind his wall. The other thing to mention is that she's supposed to be waking up from it. Like there's something you have to give them to wake him up from it. And the way that he just looks at her, and he does like this monologue. And it's not like an out of nowhere monologue. It's a monologue that felt really natural when he just breaks down what he does next, and he just squirts the syringe against the wall. It's as graphic as like any throat slit or just like blood drenched across the wall. Like it's just it's not like, knowing that it's not violent, but knowing what he's doing is essentially sentencing her to death like that. I was like, that's pretty brutal for me.
Yeah, that was definitely I don't know what else to say about that. It was an intense scene. Okay, and the other scene you mentioned,
when he takes his assistant to see his wife, you feel like the sense of longing he has for her, and just like you can tell that he doesn't want to do these things. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. But then then he's like, but I will for her. It's like, and then that's when the switch in that scene happens. I'm like, that just kind of took me off guard, because like in the middle, I'm starting to feel sympathy for him, and then they just turn and he just turns that switch around to not feel so safe with him. You're like, okay, so I don't feel very safe around his intentions or whatever. And it's like, I guess I feel bad for his wife more than him.
Well, the interesting thing is, he has dual motivations. One is to save his wife.
Right.
But he also, in order to save his wife, he has to learn about the brain. And that alone becomes a end in itself. And he has a great ends justifies the means quote, where he says at some point, in the interest of science, anything is justified. Anything. A direct quote. So not just about saving his wife, but the science itself. In the interest of science, anything's justified. So I don't know when everybody learned about Joseph Mengele's experiments, but it was around this time, right? So like
there probably was definitely a lot of parallels about that.
Having a character say, in the name of science, anything is justified. That's like a pretty potent thing to be saying right at that moment in time.
I don't know if it's the writer side of me or just the fact that I've watched Young Frankenstein so many times, but I had a feeling it was going to end with the inspector coming in. Like when I found out about Curry still being in the basement, the first thing that went off in my mind was the inspector's going to see Curry in some way. And this guy, because essentially his character is either the only way out for him would be death in the situation he's in. Cause like he can't go anywhere. He can't leave this guy's estate. He's stuck being Basil Rathbone's assistant until his experiments are done, or he decides he's got no more use for him. And if he's going to escape in any way, there's going to have to be something that proves his innocence. And the only way to do that is if someone sees Curry alive, and the only source of law enforcement we see is the inspector that goes to Odo's house.
Right.
Once I knew what it was trying to do, I felt I knew where it was going to go by the end.
Right. It was a bit predictable. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me break down some of my qualms, because sometimes I have nitpicks and sometimes I have major things. So let me start with some of the nitpicks, and then, I'll start with a nitpick and then I'll get into some more major things. The title. So this was also released as Cadman's Secret, and that would make more sense. The Black Sleep is a cooler sounding title, although I gotta admit, it sets you up for thinking that the Black Sleep is actually a major thing when it's actually just a MacGuffin. It's to get him into the story. It's not that important to the story. It's just we got to get this doctor here, and force him to do.
It's the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, it is the stuff that dreams are made of. So
literally.
So the big thing here, and I think this is a lack of directing skill. And it might be writing too, but really directing, because at the writing stage, you don't know who's going to be cast. You don't know any of that stuff, usually. This being a studio film, maybe they did, but someone like Todd Browning would have done really well with this material. I think it has all the elements, but there's sometimes when you have all the ingredients that go into a cake and you put them together, it's not going to make a cake. Everything about the way that the cake is made has to be done exactly right. And it has to rise in the oven. And it could be that this just didn't properly rise or flopped or whatever. That's the best analogy I can give, because it has everything. It has the cool sets. It's got the good music. And it has Basil Rathbone, Lon Chaney, John Carradine, Bela Lugosi, and Tor Johnson. All right. So it's got this amazing cast, and it wastes them because they only appear in it very briefly. And the two that appear most frequently, which is Lon Chaney and Bela Lugosi, are mute.
Yep.
So they don't even have any lines.
That was one thing I did look up, and apparently Lugosi was upset that he wasn't given lines. He wanted to have lines written in for him, but they elected against it. And apparently Chaney said he was fine not having lines. But no, you're right. Like, in hindsight, knowing this is Lugosi's last film, like, if you don't count Plan 9, of course, because
let's talk about Plan 9, because this has Tor Johnson in it, and this has Bela Lugosi in it, both of whom are in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yep.
Now, sad as it is to say, Ed Wood may have used these two actors better.
Or used them worse in a way that makes them used better.
But here's what I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I read this somewhere. Lugosi did want lines, and they filmed them. They filmed them, but they ended up cutting them. They ended up on the cutting room floor. Those cuttings were in Plan 9. Plan
Really?
9 has footage that was originally shot for The Black Sleep with Lugosi.
Interesting.
Now, it's been a long time since I've seen Plan 9. I got to go back and watch it. Well, next time you watch it, see if...
I am definitely going to be looking to see if any of that footage matches this time.
Yeah.
I can tell between the production values of this movie and the bedsheet backgrounds for their other scenes.
Yeah. This was originally on a double bill with The Creeping Unknown, which is also known as Quartermass Experiment, which is a great film. Maybe we'll talk about that in a future show. But that's my biggest complaint, is that if you were just to read or see the poster, you'd think, this is amazing. You know,
you have all the names there to put on the poster. Exactly.
Yeah. It's a little bit like Universal's like House of Frankenstein or something, where they're like, all right, we're going to go all in and get all the main horror actors in one all-star extravaganza.
Mm-hmm.
But this just kind of falls flat. It has all the ingredients. It just doesn't bake right.
Yeah, and that is definitely something I felt in this film too. Like, I'm glad I saw it, knowing its place in history. Like you said, knowing that there's this many iconic horror actors in it. But yeah, there were times, like even for an hour and 20 minutes, I felt it dragging a lot. And that's just, I mean, for an hour and 20-minute film to drag at times, it's like, what did they not use? Like you said, the sets are there, the atmosphere is there, the concept is there, the actors are there, and in many ways the script is even there. But yeah, it's just like something in the director has to understand how to take these ingredients, and instead of making scrambled eggs and bread, you want to make a cake.
Yeah,
that's what a good director does, is they know how to take those ingredients and make them into something else.
That said, I want to say that this might have been better on the big screen. Probably, yeah. Like, I think if I had been sitting in a theater watching this and like the scenery was huge on the screen and everything, like, I think I might have been able to cut it a little more slack. So I think it probably suffers from home video, and which is one of the reasons this has been a very hard to find thing on home video for many, many years. It was out of print, and it's kind of a forgotten film. It occupies this era, like the Universal monster movies of the 40s. That's over. That era is kind of at an end.
Yeah.
And the Hammer horror films of the 50s and 60s, what we mentioned, this came on a double bill with the Quartermass Experiment. That came out in 62. That was sort of the beginning of, that was a Hammer film, I'm pretty sure. That was the beginning of Hammers coming out and being the new breed of horror film, the Blumhouse of its era. And
right.
That's kind of my take on things. I think that, you know, you don't want to give Tor Johnson a bunch of lines, but Bela Lugosi,
at least give Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. deserve some lines.
And in fact, when he does appear, John Carradine as like this religious fanatic, which that was pretty wild, like left field crap. I kind of dug that, because it's like, okay, the guy is like got some brain damage, but for him, it manifests itself in this like religious zealotry thing, you know? And that was kind of cool. That he's like, clearly is like, I'm going to have 2 minutes of screen time, so I'm going to like go over the
every
top
second.
With this.
And, and the movie needed more of that. The movie needed to trust its actors to do that. Which, One other thing, little anecdote I found funny while I'm watching this movie, and again, because watching it on Pluto, they had commercial breaks. The one thing that kept cracking me up is I'm watching this story about the morality of science and experimenting on people, and every time it cut to a commercial, it went straight to like St. Jude Hospital or Galen School of Nursing. I'm like, wow, know what you're putting your advertising on.
We should let the audience know we tried like hell to find versions. Nobody's streaming this. It's not an in-demand film, so none of the streaming services have it. I looked for it. Home video releases are really rare, so finding it in a library is practically impossible. So we had to watch free streaming. What do you call it? Ad-supported.
It's like free streaming ads. if they're familiar with Pluto TV or Tubi, they'll know what it is. It's like, sure, you'll get your movie. It's free. All you do is you put your email address in, or just put like a subsection email address you created just for this. But the downside is it's like you're watching cable again, where you're got commercial breaks, and unlike television, it's like they don't care when they're interjecting their commercials. It's just like, okay, it's been about 15, 20 minutes, put something in. Doesn't matter if it's
it
like,
can be in the middle of someone's line.
Yes. And it's infuriating.
FAST is what it's called in the industry, free ad supported streaming television. It's the fastest, it's the, pardon the pun, fastest growing streaming area right now. So everybody's going all in, and we're now seeing like stalwarts like God rest HBO Max. I think our new
Warner
HBO
Brothers
is going to have like an ad tier, and like, you know, they're all doing it now. They're all, I think Disney is going to have an ad tiered one if they don't already. And it's just like, yeah.
I said it when streaming, like when Netflix first became a thing, and then all of a sudden we started hearing, oh, well, we're going to get this streaming and this streaming. I was like, and everyone's like, and again, 10 years ago, when everyone's talking about, oh, cutting the cable, saving money, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, give it time, because you guys are creating your new monster right now. It's like, they're going to have to, like, they're thinking they're creating something new, but they're just reinventing the wheel of cable. We're going back to getting cable eventually.
I don't mind it as long as we still get, first of all, they need to get more stuff into streaming. Like, these libraries need to grow. When Netflix first started, it was many thousands of movies more than it has now. But even Disney and HBO and stuff like that, they need to increase their archives. It needs to be like when we could go to the video store, or we could go to the library, still can, and get all this back catalog. But because streaming costs space, storage space and bandwidth, they keep a set amount and rotate them in and out. And that means at any given time, you might not be able to see a certain film. And only something like 10% of all films are even available to stream, you know? And so it's like, my worry is that what's going to happen, and I know this is going to happen with we're speculating about the new HBO, which is going to happen any day now. It's going to go from HBO Max to Max. And they're folding in their supposedly profitable, or needs to be more profitable, reality TV, like Discovery Plus or whatever, into it. And so my fear is, this is my fear. They say it's not going to change anything for HBO subscribers, but I think it is. They're going to need to displace stuff in order to add the entire catalog of, like, it's not just going to grow by the size of Discovery Plus. They're going to take a little from column A, a little from column B. Column A for me happens to be cinema. That's what HBO is known for. It's documentaries, it's movies, it's home box office. That's what it is. And they're going to displace a certain amount of movies, which already isn't a big enough catalog, in my opinion. And they're going to displace it with reality TV.
This is the danger of mergers. Like, mergers, to give it Rick and Morty terms, it Cronenberg's companies. That's what it does. Is like, but you take these other entities, what they are, and when you think that you're just blending them all together, the only people that profit are the board.
All right. We have gone so far off topic that I think it's time to wrap this up. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and good review on whatever platform it is that you use to download this. If you want to talk to us, you can email us at GC8podcast. That's letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. Until next time, this is Eric.
This is John.
Signing off.
Want to say goodnight?
Good night.